Put your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
Bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief, and I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on Pop Culture Minefield. And we have a great show in store for you today. We're going to do the movie The 7-Ups, and I have an NYPD officer here we're going to introduce in a little bit that's going to help guide us through this movie. It was a fantastic movie, but before I get into our movie, I just want to remind you that we have the Thanksgiving celebration at the Los Angeles Mission in downtown Los Angeles. It's tomorrow, actually. I've signed up to volunteer. This will be, I think, my 5th year where I go down and I serve meals to the homeless at the Los Angeles Mission. Now, the Los Angeles Mission provides services year-round to the people of Skid Row. They provide over 400,000 meals a year. They provide beds for the night for the people who want to get off the streets for a night. And they provide wraparound services with 6 to 12 month course of treatment when people are really ready to get off the street and reintegrate into society. Now, the issue with the LA Mission is they are faith-based, so they don't get any money from government. They depend on the kindness of the men and women in our audience, myself, to make donations so that they can fulfill their mission at the Los Angeles Mission. So go to the losangelesmission.org and make a donation. Anything helps, $25, $50, $100, and do a good deed for the day. Do a good deed for the Thanksgiving Day celebration. And hopefully I can get some pictures tomorrow, and we'll post them at my next show that I'm hosting. I will be on hiatus today, and I firmed up a guest host who will handle the next 2 weeks. Cliff Yates, he's going to be a guest here today, and so that's just putting up more added pressure on him by calling him out today just before the show. The other thing, I was on TNT radio yesterday where I did expert commentary on the I-10 freeway debacle here in California. In reality, I called out the governor for his failure. I mean, they got it repaired in 10 days, and they're doing a victory lap about what a great job they did. But the bottom line is they failed to protect the critical piece of infrastructure. They failed in a lot of areas, and the media and the governor's propaganda machine did a pretty good job of casting it as a victory when it should have been cast for what it really was, a failure. But migrate over to TNT online radio, and you can find the subject. I think the program is State of the Nation, and they probably have me listed as Chief Patrick Jordan. So it was a great show, and I did get a chance to get a plug for Pop Culture Minefield. They plug the show every time I go on there, and so it was a good time. But let's get to our show here. Let me bring on my guests. We'll bring on our favorite and regular guest who's agreed to co-host first, retired Sergeant Cliff Yates from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Cliff has his own podcast, which I'll talk about a little bit, but he did 30 plus years on the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, as well as a stint as a deputy sheriff in upstate New York. Hey, Cliff, welcome to the show.
Pat, thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure. Looking forward to this episode for the great movie they were reviewing. Thanks again for having me on.
And you could see scrolling at the bottom of the screen the Cliff Yates show. And I was a guest on a show just a couple weeks ago. I went back to look at it, and I must say it was actually a pretty good show. So go back, not just because I was on it, but I like the format, just a discussion between two cops about what's going on in the world today. And we brought some insight that you don't get in the mainstream media. So, hey, let's bring on our second guest, because he's going to add some reality to this movie that we're going to do here. And that is Vic Ferrari. I think if I said that name right. Did I say that name right?
You did. Thanks, Chief.
Okay. And he's retired NYPD detective. Let's see, detective turned author. Okay, hey, I guess I should have reached out. What's your latest book that you wrote and is out there?
My latest book, and I just got it out today. It's so new, I don't even have a copy yet. It's called NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. It's a behind-the-scenes look of the New York City Police Department.
Okay, well, I'm going to start a new show December 6th, and one of the things I'm doing is I'm reviewing books written by cops that kind of give the real life drama of what they went through in their career. The first one I'm going to do is Danny R. Smith was a homicide detective on the sheriff's department. He's a writer as well. He's written many fictional books, but he wrote a biography of his time, and it's very interesting. So I think if I get that kind of format going and it works well, I'll bring on other authors. So I'll keep you in mind.
Thank you.
For future shows if that works out. But how many years did you work for the NYPD?
I did 20 to the day.
20 and out, right? So,
oh, yeah.
And you retired. What kind of detective were you? What were you doing at the end?
I worked in organized crime. My last 10, I was a detective in the auto crime division. So chop shops, exporting stolen vehicles out of the country, changing VIN numbers on cars for resale, a lot of mob cases, etc.
Yeah. So this movie that we're going to do. So let me launch the movies here. But this movie is something that you would be familiar with, what these guys are investigating and who they're investigating. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the movie is The 7-Ups. And it was released in 1973. It's a neo-noir mystery action thriller, and it was produced by Philip D'Antoni. Okay, well, thank you. I'm glad I got an Italiano here. He can correct me. And Roy Schneider is starred in it. And I like Schneider from the Jaws, but I also liked him in The French Connection. He was pretty good there. He was almost like the guy holding Gene Hackman's character back, Popeye Doyle back in that movie. But I liked him in that. And he's kind of this crusading policeman in charge of a group called the 7-Ups. And there was, what's interesting is I watched the movie, there was only really one time where they kind of made a reference to where the name came from, right? Why they called them the 7-Ups. And I don't know if you guys caught that, but it's an interesting show. And I watched it, God, I don't know, it came out 50 years ago. I think I watched it probably 40 years ago as a teenager and or as a young man, and really loved it. And that's, I love The French Connection as well. And so what'd you think of the movies? What'd you think of this movie, Vic?
Oh, it's one of my all-time favorites. I was a little boy when it came out, and I'm 50. I'm going to be 58 years old, and my parents didn't adhere to the American Motion Picture Association of America's RPG rated. So when that movie came out, I remember back then, you get the newspaper, and in the newspaper you'd have like the ads for the movies coming out. And I was so into that. And I saw that, and I was begging at 7 years old. I'm begging my parents to take me to see a PG rated movie. And we went to see it around Christmas time. And it's one of my all time favorites.
Well, what about you, Cliff? What'd you think?
Yeah, I love this movie. I was a little bit older. It was in 73. So I was in 10th grade driving. And so, I mean, I just loved it. Yeah. And, at the time I was becoming infatuated with New York City. And so, I still love it to this day.
I actually don't think I saw it at the theater. So, I just think I saw it on TV. And I loved movies growing up. That was my escape in the family there. And I had a big family. So, and a bunch of sisters. So I needed the escape, a little bit of macho adrenaline in the whole cop shows and the Western stuff. And so I really like it. And it is, New York, for most of us, I grew up in Detroit, so it is a big city, but it's kind of a big chunk of it's kind of suburban like, right? But the whole New York City vibe, right? The environment that you're operating in is completely different than what most people realize, right? I don't know if you ever policed anywhere or did any work anywhere else other than in New York City, Vic, but it is a different kind of policing in New York, right?
Oh, yeah. And I did. I mean, after I retired from the NYPD, I became a cop for a small police department in Florida, and the differences were night and day. It just was totally different. It's like having a stroke and having to learn everything all over again. Someone does something wrong, you throw the cuffs on them, but then the procedures are different, and what goes in one place doesn't go in another.
Yeah, well, yeah, Cliff, same thing. You policed in upstate New York and then LA County. We have a little bit of urban vibe that's kind of like New York, but it is completely different policing.
It is. I was surprised, even though I was in upstate and we did things a lot differently, but still from California, and just like in New York and upstate, when we made an arrest, we had to arraign that person, immediately. They just didn't go into the clink. And then when I get to LA, there's a bail schedule. We didn't even arraign them. We arrested. Burglary is the charge. This is the bail, and you take them right to jail. Where in New York, we had to go in front of most of the time for me, it was a justice of the peace. Bail was sent. A commitment was made out if they didn't make bail, and then the commitment was taken to the jail and they were put in jail. And I know Vic can speak to New York, but kind of a similar type thing. They have to be arraigned prior to being committed.
Yeah, well, I've never done any policing anywhere else other than LA. And one of the other things they had me working on these social justice warrior projects where I was how to get people out of jail quickly. So the one guy that at least was willing to look at new ideas, was I at the time? I was an executive. So, but what I learned about California, how we did things a lot different out here, is most misdemeanors we cited out, but that wasn't the case around the country. And so these people came to LA to tell us how we can reduce our jail population, and all their recommendations were things that we had done for decades. So they were failing. They couldn't quite hit a mark because they said, well, how come you're not getting people? Because they already do everything. They're already way ahead of what everybody else is doing, everybody else needs to do. And for us, it was just standard operating practice. If they had good idea, you just cited them out. You didn't arraign them and put them in jail. But hey, let's get into the movie. And the first scene is, who are these guys? And it really kind of sets up who these guys are as a crew. And so here we go. We see right. And so he's doing some surveillance. And this is an interesting. Now, when I did the French Connection, they were doing surveillance and monitoring on the streets of Manhattan, which is completely different than trying to do any kind of surveillance or monitoring in a suburban environment in an LA. So Vic, can you speak to that? How are you able to track your guys in this busy, dense terrain that we call New York City, Manhattan, wherever these guys are at?
Well, surveilling somebody in Manhattan is unique because it's usually a team of people doing it. It's not just one or two guys. And the first thing you got to learn is how to parallel park immediately. So if someone pulls over or gets out of a car, if there's a spot, you've got to jump into it and parallel park immediately and bail out of the car. There's also constant communication, which whoever steps out of the vehicle in the field team, if both guys can't get out of the car, one gets dropped off, the other one's going to look for parking. A lot of times these guys, they're sharp. They'll jump on a train like you saw in the French Connection to lose you to make sure. And the New York City subway system is built for something like that because you can go into one exit and pop up out of another one. It's difficult to tail somebody in New York, but there's a plus to it because it's easier to blend in if you're following somebody because there's just so many people and so much going on and there's so many places you can duck into. If you're in the middle of nowhere following somebody and you're the only guy or the only car, you stand out like a sore thumb. So in Manhattan, it kind of works both ways for the bad guys and the police.
Yeah.
Cliff, any comments on that? Because
yeah, I was going to say that, and of course, I'm just a novice of New York, but I love New York, but I've come to love it and try to whenever I'm there. And we have a timeshare there at 6th Avenue and 53rd at the Hilton. And I just was noticing, oh my God, I think one of the opening scenes is at 54th and Madison. Oh, I've been on that corner. And then I can imagine Vic must have seen every corner in this movie he must have related to. And I'll let him speak to that. But I like that I was recognizing all these locations, even as a novice New Yorker.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, and you can see it in the movies, is how Broadway in the 60s and 70s was not the Broadway that it was in the late 90s and 2000s. I think it seems to be going back downhill, but it was revitalized and big chunks of the city were revitalized. And I think it's important that we talk about that. Here we're talking about old school police work where they're kind of monitoring these crooks and they've got a plan for how they're going to get in there. It's unconventional plan that they're using. This is what the whole team is all about. But the work done by the NYPD to clean up New York, to revitalize New York, was unprecedented, right? This was an unprecedented effort by the NYPD with the support of Giuliani and some of the other leaders in the city. Would you kind of agree with that assessment, Vic?
Oh, absolutely. New York was a three-ring circus when I got hired in 87. And, they didn't really want they didn't want cops making street level drug arrests. That was for the narcotics division, which each borough had like 20 detectives doing narcotics. So that wasn't going to fly. Just New York was awash in drugs. They did not want you getting involved in quality of life things. If you brought in a misdemeanor, they tell you, listen, give this guy a DAT, which is called a desk appearance ticket, or we used to call a disappearance ticket. And half these guys didn't carry ID. So you're giving somebody a thing to show up in court. You're not even sure who he is. You'll fingerprint him, but he's in the wind. And then you find out the guy was wanted for a homicide and you just let him walk out the door. The funny thing, just in the scene that they're showing in the very beginning, the bad guy that drops off the package of counterfeit money is Detective Sonny Grasso.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he was the catalyst and the inspiration for the movie The French Connection, and he was also the co-writer, and it was his story that made this into a movie. So he's got a bit part. He's the guy that gets brought back into the antique shop in handcuffs. He's wearing like a hat. He's the bad guy that drops off the money. I actually got to meet him. We'll get into that later.
Great. Well, I'm glad you added that, and we should talk about the Sonny Grasso and his partner was, I forget what the partner for French Connection was. What is his real name?
Eddie Egan.
Eddie Egan, that's it. They were legendary on the department, at least in some circles. Could be legendary or infamous depending on who you are, I guess. But this was when old school style policing was tolerated, right? And we took a much softer approach for a long time before we started. Even the broken windows theory is not quite the same because that's sweating the small stuff to impact the big stuff. But this was a different kind of policing, right, Vic?
Oh, absolutely. The NYPD back in those days, the 60s, the 70s, they weren't big on making changes. And everything was thought out or overthought until and then by the time they came to a decision, it was obsolete. The 7-Ups or the type of policing you see there was done in the 50s with this going after guys that were going to do 7 years in an upstate prison and up, depending on their crimes. And then they disbanded it. The NYPD is constantly doing one thing and go, no, we can't do that anymore. It's the same as the street crime unit. The NYPD street crime unit was undercover guys going around the 5 boroughs in taxi cabs, going for guns and robberies. And they were making, the small unit was making the most gun arrests in the city. And then the NYPD, they don't know when to take their foot off the gas. They go, well, if we've got 30 cops making 1,000 gun arrests a year, let's make it 100 cops. And what happens is then you start getting younger guys that don't have the street experience and the contracts start going in. So you got some cop who barely did anything his whole career, who's got a lawn company, who's cutting some chief's lawn, and he puts him in and he's not up for the task. And that's how you get into bad shootings and questionable shootings, and the thing falls apart. And then they disbanded the street crime unit because they kind of grew it too large, and then things kind of got out of hand.
Well, so you're telling me the 7-Ups was actually a real crew on NYPD back in the day?
Through the research, that's where Sonny Grasso got the idea for the screenplay.
Well, and so because they do allude to that in, I guess when they're in the captain's office, they said, well, these guys get 7 and up. So then that was the first time, okay, that's where the movie comes from, that they go after guys who are likely to spend a lot of time in state prison, at least 7 and up, as you said. So I didn't know that. That's just why I love having guys on there who are there. But I think the other thing is what I noticed about this show, and I'm not sure, so I wanted to ask this: since you were organized crime, there's a lot of people involved in criminal activity that aren't necessarily in the mafia, but they have linkages to, and they have to. It seems to me they have to pay homage to, or at least pay their cut to, the organized crime folks. And I see a little of that in here because not all of them are Italian, but
right,
all of them are in the game, right? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so with the Mafia 5, you got 5 families in New York, or you did. I don't know what's going on now. I'm retired almost 16 years. But so each Mafia family, basically, they've got their own schemes going. But now if you're not Italian or you're not a member of an organized crew, you're a bad guy, but you don't want to get ripped off or screwed with, or there's other crews that rip off people. So you go on record with a mob soldier or associate, and going on record is, so say I got a drug business, I don't want to get ripped off, I don't want a home invasion, I don't want to, or I'm a loan shark and somebody beats me for money. If I'm kicking up and I go on record with a mob soldier, any problem I have, I go to him and say, listen, my place got hit, all right, let me find out who did it and I'll take care of it. Or this guy owes me $100,000 and, you know, I'm paying you 10% of that every week. And now he's not paying me. Okay. I'll send Rocco and Al over there and give him a nice tune up. So you're not a made member, and there's Jewish guys, black guys, Spanish guys that go on record, they're mob associates, and they'll do work too. I mean, as far as, you know, whacking somebody or tuning somebody up. So you're right. It basically, the mob is like the police department for people that don't go to the police and are doing things outside the boundaries of society.
Well, which is interesting because we're going to get, that's partly what this show is about, and we'll get into that in a minute. But you know what, Cliff, one of the themes, because I did the movie Sudden Impact, Dirty Harry movie. It was the fourth in the series, my last show. And one of the themes in a lot of these great cop shows is the ends justify the means, right? That, you know, the ends that the means that we use justify where we get, and that's putting the bad guy in jail. And I personally think that's why the public loves it so much, because they just want do something, solve the problem. And I think the pendulum is starting to swing back a little bit with the head of the NAACP up in Oakland saying it's okay to put criminals in jail. It's not racist. I think the pendulum, I mean, that was a couple months ago. The pendulum is starting to swing back where just do your job, right? And of course, I think cops have been betrayed by the political establishment, but that's what's going on here. That's why I think the audience likes these movies. Do you kind of agree with that, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, and of course I was fascinated by this movie for a couple of different. For some reason, I was always fascinated with organized crime, specifically in New York and in upstate Rochester, New York. We had a couple of factions that would battle it out, and so I used to study all the the five families: the Gambinos, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, the Bananos. I got into all those cultures, and I was just fascinated by it. So these movies kind of coincided what was actually happening. And I was glad that I was able to go down and take the New York City police test in 1983 at Norman Thomas High School in Lexington Avenue and see the difference. And my mom and aunt went with me. And at the time, of course, you know, even though you knew how bad things were, you really didn't have a perspective until, like Vic was saying, Giuliani, and then they started to make the turnaround. Because when I saw it later, then I saw, oh, wow. Now, you know, when I saw Grand Central before, all these, you know, these homeless are laying all over. It was a seedy place. And now there's coffee shops and yuppies running around. But it was really beautiful. And it was just like the turnaround was really immense. And it was crazy. So I love seeing the different perspectives. I'm glad I had a chance to go down and take the test. And like you say, and I think maybe the pendulum is swinging. And like you were saying, it's definitely the hero's journey. We want to see good versus evil. We want to see good win out in the end, just like we do in these movies.
And sometimes they're not too concerned with your methods to get there, right?
Yeah, and I think like Vic was saying, sometimes, oh, this worked. You know, we have 30 of these officers doing this. Let's make it 100. And then all of a sudden things get out of balance. And like you said, maybe then, you know, a good thing going too much will trip everything up.
Well, last time I was in New York was probably about 6 years ago. I was asked to speak on a panel, so I went there, and I was in Midtown Manhattan. And you know, it was an interesting panel. It was Marilyn Mosby. So I was brought in to be the counter voice to the drama, because they had two Soros Splendid DAs there and some guy from Holland, and it was all, you know, hugs and kisses will solve all of our problems, right? And the people who brought me there kind of pushed me to the table, said, "Hey, man, speak up," you know. And then I, of course, challenged their assumptions. But I decided, you know what, I liked Manhattan, and I said, yeah, I was on a plane all day yesterday. I'm just gonna walk until a few miles, get a walk in. Although I was in a suit, right? And so I probably walked about 2 hours, just all the way straight down Manhattan, or, you know, down to Lower Manhattan. And of course, you can see things changing a little bit.
Yeah.
And I figured once I got to where I was really tired, and I go, ooh, this is getting to be a little dicey neighborhood even for me. You know, I called an Uber and got out of there. But I probably been to Manhattan, I don't know, maybe a dozen times doing that kind of gig where I was speaking on something, whether it was terrorism, transit policing, or my last big expertise was anti-recidivism programs they brought me in for. But I loved it there, and I'm really disappointed at seeing what is happening in New York, because it's our largest city, and it's terrible what they've done to it. But let's get into our next show, and this is, I call it the informant, the next segment, and this is where our main character there, Sonny, he meets up with his friend Vito, and they're talking, and Vito, it appears to be an informant. We find out a little bit later there's a little more going on with this character, and I never quite really got why he owed Sonny so much here, why he was giving him all this information, what the debt was there, maybe something that happened as a kid, but he's our informant, and he's also somebody who's connected with the mob, but he's friends with, obviously Sonny. And that's not unusual, right, Vic? Where they grow up in the Italian neighborhoods and some go to the police and some, associate with the mobsters, and information kind of goes back and forth, right? That happens.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood where, and Cliff and I were talking about this on his podcast, where I grew up in a neighborhood in the Bronx where there was several ways you could go. You could go the civil, most guys went the civil service route. A handful went to college, and then the rest were knockaround guys that, played out of bounds, and it depended on what level you were going to go. Were you going to become a full-fledged member of the mob, or were you going to, play out of bounds and steal cable and sell illegal cable boxes and all sorts of other crap? In this movie, you got Tony LoBianco and Roy Scheider, they're childhood friends, and there's a scene later in the movie where you see Scheider walking through Arthur Avenue when he goes into a barbershop. That's the Little Italy section of the Bronx, the Belmont section of the Bronx. And Tony LoBianco, they're from the same neighborhood, and LoBianco owns a funeral home in that neighborhood in Little Italy. And that's where that's where these two were together at the hip, and LoBianco deals with organized crime members. He's probably an associate. He probably, with that funeral home, comes in handy when someone's got to be buried or burned or dismembered. Yeah. So he's not a full-fledged member, but he hears things. Guys come to him with favors, and he plays the part. He's not really a mob guy, but look at the way he's dressed. He's got the camel hair coat. He's got the fedora. When mob guys come into his place, he gives them a kiss on both cheeks. He hears things. Right. And he's got a wife and kids, and his wife is sick. So he's going to play both ends against the middle. He's going to provide Scheider with information on guys that aren't really with him, but he hears things. And then in the interim, he's going to provide his mob guys, his crew of guys are going to start kidnapping wise guys. So he's playing both ends against the middle. I actually met LoBianco 2000 at the Millennium New Year's Eve celebration. They had us down there, in Times Square, and I spotted him. And I go, Tony LoBianco. And he goes, hey, how's it going? I says, my favorite movie is The 7-Ups. He goes, really? He signed my book, and I was shooting the shit with him for about 20. Really nice guy.
Is he still with us? Do you know?
He is. He's still alive.
You'll have to hit him up. We'll get him on a show here. I had an actor on my last show, Kevin Major Howard. It was the first time I had a non-cop on the show. And he was in Sudden Impact. He was the, Clint Eastwood pulls him by the tie at the dog shit scene in the elevator. That was him. And it was really fun having him on because, he added a lot of dimension, because we do go over the film part of the movie, although we tend to do more cop stuff related to it. But there is an interesting interplay when real cops are talking about the movie, and then you have the actors talking about trying to get into the role of the movie. It was fun. If you have contact, we'll have to try and get him on. But there is this intersection, and you guys do have these long developed relationships. Even though somebody might go, let's say I don't want to say to the dark side, but they go on the other side of the tracks with you, you still maintain some level of friendship with those guys, right, Vito or Vic?
I didn't. Here's the thing. Okay. You're going to have, there were guys I grew up with, and we just went our separate ways. One guy that lived on my block, grew up with him, played football, Little League. We lived 2 doors down. There's countless stories in my books about him. But, once I became a cop, he started hanging out with guys that he shouldn't have, and he started getting into drugs. And I ran into him one time at the bank, and I had heard that he had gone upstate for a while. And he had that heroin look, and he's like, oh, we got to go out for a beer sometime. And I said, listen, don't take this the wrong way, but what do we have in common?
Yeah.
I says, you went your way, I went why? He goes, oh, it's going to be like that. I go, what do you want me to do? I've already got 5 years invested with this job. I want to retire. I like what I'm doing. Hanging around with you is not going to help me.
Yeah, I came to California in 81. I was on the sheriff's department in 83, and so I graduated high school in 80, and there were a couple of buddies of mine that went down that drug path. And I think, I think it's important, Cliff, I'll throw this at you to recognize that our coming of age as young teenagers and in our 20s, there was this substance out there called cocaine that drew people into a life that none of us wanted to be in, right? It was addictive. Which went from powder cocaine to crack, which made it an every man's drug, right? I mean, powder cocaine was expensive, but once they start rocking it up, it became something that even a working class guy could afford, which is what was so destructive. But a lot of people that first hit, they ended up living that lifestyle for a while. I don't know if you experienced that, Cliff, with your friends, but I just lost a friend last week. That's what his first 10 years after high school was all about. What about you, Vic? I mean, I'm Cliff. God, I'm
Yeah,
starting
yeah. I grew up in that small town in upstate New York. We had 3,000 people. My dad was the chief of police, so it kind of insulated me because the druggies wouldn't invite me. Just knowing that my dad was the chief, so I was able to stay away from it. Now, the only drug we had was marijuana. There was no cocaine, no talk of cocaine. When I started policing in upstate New York in 1978, I would arrest people for having some seeds of marijuana. That was a felony. They got locked up. Marijuana was a felony in 1978, and people went to jail for one small roach. So where I grew up, that was like the big drug of the time. There was no cocaine at all.
Well, when I first got to LA, I was doing a security job at a hotel, and there was coke at all of these parties that they had going on here. And then my early career, 85, working in Hollywood, it was all over the place. And then when it started rocking up, it just exploded. I will say I had the advantage, Vic. I didn't have to worry about. I went from Detroit to LA, and I knew nobody here and built a life, so I didn't have to worry about
me
previous
too.
friendships and people going the wrong way. I'd go home and visit. They'd all come and we'd have a beer, and then I'd leave again, right? But a lot of my buddies who went into law enforcement, they had to begin to regulate their relationships with people that used to be tight friends because they went down the wrong path.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to deal with that. But there are some historic cases in New York where guys who were cops and were associated with the mafia. I think we saw this conviction a few years ago of what they call the mafia cops and that kind of stuff. I don't know if it is a black mark on the NYPD. Do you want to speak to that issue, Vic? Because I think one of the things about black marks is I was just quoted in the Epoch Times about our deputy gang problem, and I said, it's a lot smaller than people think, very small. And is not my experience in 38 years on the sheriff's department. That is not widespread at all. It was just politicized. So when they talk about the mafia, that isn't a reality for the entire NYPD, although it's a black mark and it gets applied to the entire NYPD. So you want to talk to that issue a little bit?
Sure. So in the NYPD, they created probably in the 70s called OCCB, Organized Crime Control Bureau, and what that is when you go in, and there's different divisions. There's vice, there's narcotics, there's OCID, the auto crime division. You're scrutinized more to get in these units. I mean, the background check was more difficult to get into OCCB than it was coming on the job. They check your finances. They want to make sure you're not in debt. They don't want clowns handling sensitive information. And the reason they created it is because at the precinct level, like you guys said, some guys might be friendly with people that they don't even realize. Even though they're cops, they're naive to things. So for argument's sake, there's a guy that owns a luncheonette. Let's call him Uncle Joe. And every day the cops go in there and, a sandwich is $8 and Uncle Joe gives it to him for $5. And don't worry about the soda, guys, come back. Yeah, well, Uncle Joe is a made member of one of the families, right? And one day Uncle Joe's going to say, hey, Cliff, could you do me a favor? I hate to ask, but
Yes.
I got into a fender bender the other day. This fucking clown gave me the wrong information, and he's going to beat me on this claim. Can you run this plate for me? I just need so I can give this to my insurance company. Sure, Uncle Joe. And you run the plate. Well, that guy wasn't in an accident with Uncle Joe. That guy owes Uncle Joe $5,000, and he can't find him, and he's going to send a couple of guys to hit him in the head with a baseball bat. So you've got a lot of familiarity sometimes at the precinct level because they're close to these people. So OCCB was created that Macy's doesn't tell gimbals. And a lot of times that causes static where we would hit a place and the commanding officer, who's not dirty, but he would say, why didn't I know about this? I look like a fool. You guys just did a search warrant in my precinct and I wasn't aware of it. It's like, sorry, boss, but talk to our supervisors, because we don't tell you these things because we just don't want to take the chance of blowing up or losing a case based on familiarity. And it is the exception to the rule. And like you were talking about the Mafia cops, that was such a crazy story that I didn't believe it. When Gas Pipe Casso decided to cooperate in like 93, 94, I was in the narcotics division, and the papers putting out these stories. I'm like, there is no way there's these two old-time detectives going around doing hits, kidnapping people, providing information to like one of the worst mobsters of all time. And it was true. And it was the perfect storm. You had one guy whose whole family was organized crime, and he should have never have come on the job, and it should have came out in his background check at Polito, and then Caracappa, who I think was worse as far as a stone killer. And it was the perfect storm. Those guys met up, and they've probably felt each other out. And one did one thing, one did the other thing. It's like, all right, this guy's all right. And then everything was up for grabs.
Yeah, it was crazy. And those guys ended up getting a little bit, one of them, Eppolito, I think, ended up making some chops in the film industry or some kind of stuff like that. And, and wrote a book about it. I mean, the arrogance of it, but that is so small. And you explained there is a vetting process that would, for the most part, have cut that out, at least obviously since that happened anyways. But yeah, it's you get tired of being characterized by just a handful of events, having an entire agency or an entire profession hamstrung and given black marks just by a handful of things that happen. Cliff, you want to comment before we go on to our next scene?
Yeah, it's funny you were quoted. I was actually, they actually were. This is just recently. There's some L.A. Rag that really is focusing on police gangs, and they just mentioned me recently. Oh, there's a guy. He has a book, and he said in his book that police work is hunting humans, and they turned some of my statements around, but it was weird that I was getting my name was quoted even today.
Yeah,
I read her sales.
Yeah, I think I got a bump on that. As a matter of fact, because it was on Twitter too, and I go, "What? My name came up. I have an alert on there, right?" I go, "What? Somebody's mentioning me." Wow.
Okay, so I read her entire document that she put together regarding whatever gangs. So what she did is she took all the court documents for the sheriff's department for the last 30 years. She researched everything, and the accusations of deputy gangs, but also, and she labeled everybody a deputy gangster or an associate if they came up in the document. So let me give you an example. So if, let's say, Deputy John Smith does something that might theoretically he might have been sued for, which means this is not anything where you've actually been convicted of anything or you've actually been found responsible. It's just lawsuits. It's just documents in court. And what she did is she said, oh, okay, so he's been identified in the courts as a gang member, right? That's what they would say. Even though nothing's been proven, anybody in that chain of command who is, because you know how the lawsuits work. So, okay, so his sergeant is this person, his lieutenant is this person, the captain's this person. They're all included in the lawsuit. Sherman Block was listed as a gang associate. I mean, he's the sheriff of a few years back, right? And a few sheriffs ago. And so I read her entire stuff, and she got an award for this. This is not reporting. There's no validation of any of the information there. It's just accusation after accusation after accusation by attorneys hoping to make money. And she said it was valid because so many people made accusations. And so I did see where your name come up at Cliff. And I go, I'm going to have to read a deputy here to see what Cliff is up to. So anyways, but Charisse Castle, I think is her name.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah.
It's junk journalism. I took the time to read her junk. My name wasn't in it, so I didn't get sued. But I wanted to go back before we go on to our next scene, talk a couple things about what Vic said. First of all, is that the barber waved the old neighborhood kid down to tell him, hey, there's a lot of guns in the neighborhood. I liked that because it does show that there are a lot of people in the community, even when things are going on, want to do the right thing. And that's what I saw that as, right? And that's how good information to solving crimes happens. And let's see, I forgot the second thing I wanted to talk. Well, okay, that. So I enjoyed that because that's really how you solve crimes, right, Vic? Somebody giving you a tip.
Oh, absolutely. And you guys know, I mean, you got three different types of informants. You have guy that gets his hand caught in the cookie jar. That's the most, right?
Yes.
Or you've got someone who's got motives that they want to put their competition out of business, or they're looking to make money. Or then you've got John Q. Citizen, who sees something and steps up and says, this isn't right, and I want to help the police.
Yes. Well, but I know I wanted to bring that up because it does happen where people in the community say, hey, Vic, hey, take a look at this guy. This is what's going on. We do have a lot of people following us today. I've been remiss in not mentioning. We had Joe's, and we have Penny, and now we have Gap. Thanks for following us, Guy. I use the Main Street Media newspapers as cat litter liner. Yes. Yeah. Well, we use a little more upgraded litter liner, but that's definitely a worthy use for mainstream media newspapers. Let's get into our next scene. It's called kidnapping. So this is the first kidnapping, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a dangerous game. Now, so Vic, as we show these scenes, was there any historical context where they were actually kidnapping mobsters or notable criminals for payment in New York that you're aware of?
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
yeah, you had a crew of it was another perfect storm. You had a crew of Irish guys from Staten Island, and they knew some connected mafia guys, and what they were doing was they were kidnapping mob guys and holding them for ransom. What wound up happening is they kidnapped Carlo Gambino's nephew, Manny. And Gambino said, this is out of control. They're kidnapping our guys. If we keep giving them money, we're all going to be at risk. Let's just threaten them and tell them to turn themselves in and give Manny back. Well, something happened, and they wound up killing Manny Gambino. So what happened was that's how John Gotti actually became John Gotti. John Gotti was given when they went to kidnap one of these guys, witnesses got the license plate, and they didn't give the information to the cops. They gave it to the mob. So they figured out who it was, and John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and this guy, Ralphie Wiggs Galleone, went to this bar in Staten Island posing as cops to get this guy, James McBranty, out of the bar, pretending they were going to lock him up and then they were going to kill him. McBranty was like, these guys aren't cops. He starts putting up a fight. Patrons get involved. A gun comes out, and I think Galleone kills McBranty in the bar. They take off. They get caught, and then the mafia provides Gotti and Ruggiero with Roy Cohn, who was this super lawyer who actually sat in on the McCarthy hearings. He was Trump's attorney. They used to call him the Prince of Darkness. He maneuvered a deal where Gotti and Ruggiero, got like 5 years in jail for manslaughter. And then when Gotti got out, that's how he was an inducted member of the Gambino crime family, and then he was on his way. So Grasso I think Grasso put this screenplay together based on that. But what I find unusual is the hit in the movie came out about the same time. So this probably was going on for years. And then finally it came, the whole thing fell apart.
Well, this is a dangerous game for these Irish mobsters or anybody who's doing it, right? Because these guys don't go to cops. They're going to settle their debts with money or lead, and eventually it's lead, right?
Yeah, it goes to street court.
You
wind up dead.
Well, Vic, you're an aficionado of the Mafia. Anything you want to add to that?
As far as?
I'm sorry, Cliff.
No. That's amazing, because that one scene that is really accurate, because that's exactly what happened in that scene. That's amazing.
Yeah,
that was based on a true event. Yeah.
That they acted as cops. Well, the other part is I have in this scene is we go to the car wash, and these old style car washes. I don't know if they still existed when you guys started, but I remember them. You go through, and the guys are at the end of the car wash drying your car, and of course it was interesting. Okay, they have to really set up this scene, so they have to make sure they have a car that has the door handles adjacent to each other. Yeah. And I go, when I saw it 30 years ago, I didn't think of that or whatever. But then I was watching the movie a little more critically. I go, okay, well, this is a little unrealistic, but it is good Hollywood. It was a lot of drama. And what I actually liked about the movie, if you were paying attention, the music tells you they use the music in the background to heighten something's going to happen here. You got to watch. And
really good. Yeah, really good.
So I thought this whole scene was really good. It was creative, imaginative, probably a little unrealistic. So one, did you have car washes like that still in the 80s there, Vic? And what'd you think of the scene?
Oh, it was great. As a child in the movie theater, like I was scared, I was shitting bricks. So it's like, what's going to happen? Because like you said, the music sets the tone for it.
Yeah.
And the guy that composed the music for this movie is a guy by the name of Don Ellis. He was a jazz musician, and Philip D'Antoni was one of the producers on The French Connection, and he did the music for that. And then when D'Antoni went and directed this movie, he brought Don Ellis over. You could tell it's the same type of music score.
Right. Well, the other thing, Cliff, is the $1.25 for the car wash, right?
Oh my God, yeah. And we didn't see it a lot in LA, but so in Florida, these things are still big. There's been a resurgence, especially when you live near the beach because of the salt water and everything. So they have the same system here. There's like 3 within 4 miles of me where, it grabs your tire, there's a conveyor and it pulls you through. And so these things are specifically in Florida near the beach communities, they're still big.
Well, do they have where the guys are right at the end washing?
Uh-huh.
Because now you go through there and then they pull your car up and dry it all off. It's not you in it the whole time anymore.
Yeah, no. Here you can pick it so that you stay in your car, and they just do the outside, and then you just drive away, or you go through the thing and then you get out of your car and you wait in a little area, and then they dry your car off, and then because they do the interiors, but they have both available. But those conveyor systems they just opened up another new one near me, so just exactly like this, a little more modern, but same thing. It grabs your tire and pulls you through, put your car in neutral, and they push your mirrors in, if they collapse and all those things.
Yeah, well, it reminded me of the old car washes from Detroit that I remember.
Yeah.
But then the $1.25 the cost, and the ransom's $100,000, so $100,000 is 73. I'm not sure what the inflation rate on that, but that's at least 500,000, probably
at least,
more.
Yeah,
these days. So this was a big chunk of change, even for wealthy crooks, right? Right, Vic?
Oh yeah, it's probably a three-way split. And when you see that guy the kidnapping victim getting dumped out of the car, that is actually, we used to call that Sedgwick by the Sea. So that was right opposite my old station house. And we used to go drinking there after a 4 to 12. And you had the Harlem River in the background. And now it's a Metro North train yard. But it's just so funny how, like, this movie, I worked all around these places.
Yeah. Well, we got a comment from Gap After Dark question. So the Mafia isn't like The Godfather anymore, or are they? So is the Mafia as strong as they were, say, when you started in law enforcement, Vic, to when you left? So 20 years. Was it weakened by the time you left?
Oh yeah, the FBI, between the NYPD and the FBI task forces, and you have so many upper level informants that, I mean, guys do a score and the FBI and the NYPD is waiting for them. It's and now they're not as violent as they used to because they realize that homicides bring lots of jail time. So they're shelving guys now as opposed to killing them, because if you shelve a guy, maybe he's less likely to cooperate if he knows his life is in danger. They call it shelving or chasing him, like just go, as opposed to killing him. So, it used to be the drug sentences would get guys to cooperate, but it's also, guy's got a couple of bodies on him and he doesn't want to go to jail. He'll start giving up who ordered the hit, who was with him on the hit. So they're kind of pulling back from doing hits. I mean, would they do it? Yeah, absolutely. If you force their hand, but it's not the way, and they don't have the power they used to.
When you say shelving, you mean they pretty much banish them from the area, right? Or banish.
Yeah, don't come around no more. You basically, your mob, like in Pulp Fiction, when Marcellus Wallace tells Bruce Willis, "You've lost your LA privileges. Just get out of here. Don't show your face no more."
Okay, all right. Well, that's one of the things that some of the comments that came out of this scene, or that I remember listening, or that I wrote down myself, is there's no saints involved here. These are all bad guys, the kidnappers and those that are being kidnapped. There's nothing positive about any of these guys, right? And they can't call the police, which is, so they got to find their way of having their own justice. So that brings up the next scene, which is I call it The Friend. So let's see what this scene's all about. So here's The Friend, and so here's where he realizes Sonny we realize that Sonny's now being betrayed because we realize it's a three-way deal going here. We got two of the mobsters, I guess the actors. Let's see, we got Max Kalish, right? Or no, we got Moon and Bo. So we got Richard Lynch and Bill Hackman that are playing the bad guys, and then here's their partner in crime, and you realize that the information is going two ways between Vito and Sonny, right? That Sonny thinks he's getting information and confirmation, but in reality, Vito here is getting his next mark for his next kidnapping, and he's getting his payoff here, and the discussion is going on here, right? So what do you think? Is this realistic, Vic, where the information flows the other? Well, I guess it is with the Mafia guys. There is information that flows the other way, and then they use that information to gain advantage.
Yeah, they're not using the phone. They're meeting in the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx, which is a public place. They're exchanging the money, and you can see the guy Moon, Richard Lynch, is like, yeah, let's do another one, because he's a cowboy. And now you've got Tony Lobianco's like, whoa, let's let the dust blow, because he's going to hear things now. The
Right.
Kidnapping went down. They released the guy that got the money. Now he's going to hear things. Yeah, did you hear that Kalish got released? And I think Lobianco wants to know what the mob knows now. And are they going to retaliate? Do they have any idea who it is? He wants things to cool down before he gives them another name and another place to go rip somebody. But the other guy is like, come on, let's do another one. He's like, whoa, just relax.
Well, these organized crime guys, though, are the kidnappers. He's greedy, right? And that's one of the things that gets him in trouble. They get greedy. They don't calm down. They just keep the action going, right? And we kind of depended on that as cops, looking for them to continue doing their crime instead of just settling down after a big score. Would that have been your experience doing organized crime investigations in New York?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that get caught the least are the more careful. Like Vito, he's with the mobsters and he's hearing things and it's scaring the hell out of him. The other guys, Moon and Bo, Richard Lynch and Bill Hickman, they have no association to this. Like, they're in the clear. If they get up and no one knows their names or anything, Lobianco's afraid the mob is going to put two and two together and crush him.
Yeah, he'll get the special treatment. Vic, what do you? I mean, Cliff, what do you think?
Yeah, that was an interesting point you brought up. So those two jamokes there, so they're not connected, like you said. They could just walk away from and Tony Lobianco is character. Yeah, he's connected. So he is fearful because he knows what could happen just through association. Where those guys are rogue, right? They are just off the books doing these things, and so they're more likely to get caught, and they're doing it because they think they can do these things with impunity without the mob overview. But that was a good lesson from that movie.
Okay, so I remember the point I wanted to bring up there, Vic and Cliff, and as I watched Vito in his fine dress, is these overcoats, the look. I mean, I grew up blue collar, man. You wore the same jacket till you grew out of it, right? And these guys are dressed to the nines the whole time, and then of course back in the 70s and 80s, it was really important to be styling and profiling, right? If you had money, right? So that's what I noticed about it. One, I like the look, even though it's probably not practical here in California. I don't need an overcoat in California. But what do you think of the style of dress? How they are, the look, how these main characters look as they dress, and particularly Vito and actually Roy Schneider in the first scene, he had that nice, really perfect look.
Well, Vic and I talked about this on my show, that there was this guy. He was actually, his father was, I think, a detective in NYPD, but I think his nick moniker was Mad Dog Sullivan. He did over 50 murders. He ended up in upstate New York. He got caught up there doing a hit, and my buddy ended up guarding him. But this guy was known. He was known to do 1,000 push-ups a day while he was in the slammer. I actually asked a jailer out of Monroe County if he did. Oh yeah, that guy. He does 1,000 push-ups a day, but always with the tailored suits, always just primo looking with the hats and that was in 78, 79. So I did always like that look of the $1,000 suits.
What do you think, Vic? That wasn't typical of all the mobsters, but it was. Well, I don't know. I guess maybe it was typical. You were expected to look good, I guess.
The smarter ones laid low and you'd never know it. They lived below their means. They lived in a modest house, drove around in a secondhand car. Remember the scene in Goodfellas right after the Lufthansa heist? And De Niro is telling them, just lay low. And
Yeah.
guys are showing up with a new Cadillac. The guy shows up with the girl with the fur. LoBianco is starting to wear it. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you just said, he's wearing a different jacket. And, you know, even though he's telling these guys, you know, just slow it down a notch, he's starting to show he's making money. So the intelligent mobsters live below their means. You'd never know you live next door to one of them unless, you know, you were in the life or you knew them. The other ones, they're a flash in the pan. It's almost like they've got. When I was a kid, the first time I saw a beeper was a kid from my neighborhood was selling coke in my neighborhood, and he went on to bigger and better things depending on how you look at it. And it was the first time he was driving around in a new IROC, and he had a beeper. And I'm like, okay, you know, like, and he was doing coke and selling coke in all the bars in the neighborhood, and eventually, you know, he went to jail for many, many years, but. You know, you bring attention to yourself in law enforcement.
And that's why Gotti got so much attention, right? He wanted the attention. I don't know, that was, well, at least that was in the news reports.
He was going to go down anyway, but yeah, he he kind of flaunted it, and you know how it is in law enforcement. You keep waving it in their face. You know, you might be on the back burner. They would have got around to him eventually, but I mean, you know, plus on the other side of the coin, he had a couple of the Chin and the Lucchese's were trying to take him out. They were killing all his main guys, you know, to weaken him. So I mean, he would have went down anyway. But yeah, I think all his putting himself on Front Street kind of expedited him going to jail for the rest of his life.
Well, we got a guy who actually really watched this movie, Gap After Dark, and he's asking questions. Have you guys noticed any goose during the movie when Machucci turns right off 49th Street onto 10th Avenue? The shot inside the car shows Rando Tires sign outside backwards. No, I didn't notice that. I noticed to mention something about the driving of the chase, but we'll get into that chase scene in a little bit because I think that's a key aspect of the movie. Well, it's one of the most exciting parts that I liked is the chase scene. But let's go on to the DA's office. The scene. And we'll talk about it. And I have to actually remind myself of what was going on in the scene. So I got it listed as DA's office. I don't know why I got it listed as, but we got these guys that are masquerading. Okay, he gets asked, to look into a bail bondsman. Our main character gets asked, hey, looking into this bail bondsman, and he hadn't heard anything about him. So they're monitoring him. They're watching this bail bondsman, and then suddenly this bail bondsman gets kidnapped by our two main bad guys. And I think I should talk about, Bill Hickman here. Now you can see the taller guy here with the glasses. That's Bill Hickman, and he plays Bo in this movie, but he was the stunt coordinator for all three chase scenes, classic chase scenes in The Bullet, which I still have yet to do that movie, The French Connection, and then this one, a classic chase scene, which would be great if they put them in a compilation, so you can watch them one right after another and see them. And this director was also responsible. So this is the stunt coordinator, and he got a bit part in this movie, actually a little bit more than a bit part, and he plays the bad guy. And this part, they're going to kidnap this bail bondsman that Sonny and his team are monitoring at the behest of his boss, and I think somebody in the DA's office, and he's a bail bondsman. And the bail bondsman, Vic, they have a relationship of convenience that can cross the line to criminality with the crooks, right? I mean, you want to talk a little bit about that, your experience with that?
Yeah, well, they rub elbows constantly with people that are getting arrested. And Bill Hickman, you were talking about him. He was in the movie The French Connection. He played, he was the FBI agent that goes out with Cloudy and Popeye, who almost gets into a fist fight that was actually my old precinct too, on the side of the Marshall Lewis Parkway. Yeah, Hickman was a great stuntman, was in a lot of movies, but yeah, bail bondsman. Yeah, I mean, you're rubbing elbows, with scumbags for the most part, and then they take off on a bond, and now you've got to hunt them down. So and they're constantly dealing with bad guys. So he was probably, what they're showing is he had ties to the mob, and they knew he was sitting on a lot of cash. So they probably figured, well, the mob's not going to pay his ransom, but he's got money socked away somewhere, and someone's going to pay to get him back.
Right, but when you also are looking, when you're working with shady folks, Cliff, you're also looking to make side scores or whatever else you can do to make money, and maybe he's bribing the courts or whatever he's doing over there, because they don't really explain what exactly he's doing to get the attention of the DA and Sonny's boss. But I don't know. We dealt with the bail bondsmen. Sometimes they can be a little unsavory,
a little shady. Yeah, interesting here that these guys basically kidnapped this guy right on the street, and there's an officer there, right? And basically these guys are able to just say on the job and flash their tin, and then that was just kind of the way it went, right? You just let that go. You really didn't scrutinize these badges too much, because Vic will tell you a lot. I guess the penalty for losing your shield was of such it was so impacting that even cops on the job would use fake shields that they carried every day just so they wouldn't lose their real one. Is that correct, Vic?
Oh, yeah. So your shield, your gun, or your ID card. And during my time, if you lost any one of the three, it was 30 vacation days and a year on disciplinary probation. And when you get promoted, right, to any rank, the day you get promoted, they have you on an assembly line. And you're turning in. So when I was getting promoted from a cop to a detective, I hand a guy on the other side of a leaf table my NYPD shield, and they had molds. And they would put the shield in a mold. And if that mold, it didn't fit in the mold, it was a dupe. They'd pull you off the line, and you weren't getting promoted, and you get hit with it. Because a lot of cops, what they would do is they were terrified of losing their shield. So we would go out and buy a dupe, which looked exactly the same, but wouldn't fit in one of them molds. So actually, a guy standing next to me got pulled off the line because he just forgot. He probably had his real shield in a safety deposit box or hidden somewhere in his house. And the day he got promoted, he put a dupe in there, and they pulled him off the line.
Okay, so all right, Vic. So if you lost your shield or your flat badge, which was because we had a
flat badge,
you have a badge that's adjacent to your ID, what they call a flat badge, and then your badge that you wore on your uniform, right? So you always left your uniform badge in the locker, right? Because why take it with you? Because you have a flat badge. But if you lost your flat badge and ID, you just wrote a report. You just wrote a report on what happened, maybe a memo. If they felt it was some unusual circumstances, we might do an investigation, but that rarely happened with us. And only if we saw that there was some malfeasance or some irresponsibility were you subject to any discipline. That's really interesting. Wow, that's severe punishment. I guess we're up on our hour. I think Martine's up there, so let's take our break. And Martine, it's up to you, man. Go take it away.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all. Movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis. Official scoops from Geekosity magazine. Reviews and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield. Well, they're always talking nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
Okay, we are back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. We are going over the movie 7-Ups with two great guests, Cliff Yates and Vic Ferrari. And, I just want to tell you guys that next week, Cliff has agreed to, or next 2 weeks, Cliff has agreed to co-host the show. And so I will be waiting to hear what movies he's going to go over and to hear who his guests are going to be. He's done this for me before. But you can find this show every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Pacific Standard Time, and that would be 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Or no, wait a minute. What am I? I'm doing wrong. I'm talking about the other show I'm going to do. Let's see. It's 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and what would be that? That's
Eastern Standard 11.
11
Yeah.
a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm getting mixed up. I have to start doing a spreadsheet for the show because I'm going to be doing 2 different shows, 2 different formats for 2 different folks. So I have to start doing a spreadsheet to keep track of it. And I was just on the radio station for TNT. I did some commentary on some political stuff going on here in California. So I'm starting to get around a little bit, and I gotta do a spreadsheet to figure this stuff out. But you can find us on YouTube's Pop Culture Minefield every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and Cliff is going to take the ball to handle the next 2 weeks. So thank you very much, Cliff. So just a couple more things before we go on to the next scene is, like I said, shaking down the underworld is not easy, and that's exactly what they're doing here. And it's probably going to always have a negative outcome. I can't imagine it had any positive outcome for any of those Irishmen involved in the real life story that you're talking about. And I was watching a show, and I can't remember which crime boss. It was he called Joe Batters, I think was his name, right? And I can't remember what, but he was from Chicago. Anyways, some guys burglarized his house, and they didn't give the stuff right back, and all 5 of the crew ended up being murdered, right? And they knew it was him, and the guy never spent 1 day in jail. Joe Batters, a crime boss from Chicago. So there are people who live this risky lifestyle and take on guys who, are not above killing people for payback or to send a message. Usually we get those guys, as you talk about, Vic, but in that case, Joe Batters, you have to look him up because I was really shocked. First, 1, that they burglarized his house, but 2, that they didn't give it back, and then he ended up killing all these guys, and he got away with it. That was so. The next scene is really where it becomes very personal for our main character, and this is the kidnapping of the detective. So they are looking for the bail bondsman who's been kidnapped, and they're monitoring what's going on in his life. And a family member has passed away, and they're seeing if the bail bondsman shows up, and they're checking to see who's there. And of course, the Mafia guys are skittish, because a few of them have been kidnapped, and they're using the back room here, Vito's back room, to have a conversation about it. And while this is all going on, one of the mobsters' drivers recognizes that our undercover cop here has a gun, or maybe he saw his wire. I can't remember what he saw, but he knew that something was out of place, and he felt he might be part of the kidnapping crew. Now, these guys don't know if these are real cops that are kidnapping them or these fake cops. So the mobsters are anxious, angry. They want a little bit of payback, and so they kidnap our officer and they subject him to torture. And so I guess we ought to speak to that, Vic. So they don't know if these are cops that are doing this, which would be highly. I mean, it's hard to believe the real story that somebody would kidnap mobsters, but that the cops would do it too. Go ahead.
I think from the movie, I mean, when they're in the back of the funeral home and they see the wire on the cop and they bring him inside and they start beating the shit out of him, I think they realize that he is a cop, because the only reason they didn't kill him, I think, is because he was a cop, and they put him in the trunk of the car that's supposed to go with the money, basically telling the kidnappers, hey, this shit's got to stop. Here's your cop back all beat up. Instead of the ransom money, release our guy. That's the way I took it, because if they thought he was someone else, they would have tortured him to death to give up names and stuff. I think the reason they just gave him a really bad beating and put him in the trunk of the car was to deliver him instead of the ransom money to make this stop. Like, you got our guys, we got one of your guys. This has to stop. But the funny thing is that funeral home is in the Bronx, right opposite St. Barnabas Hospital. And when I was a kid, before I became a cop, I was an exterminator. And I thought I knew the Bronx really well. And one day I'm on my route and I go, holy shit, that's Lucia Brothers Funeral Home. That was in the 7-Ups. Like, I didn't have a camera or anything, because back then the camera was like this big. But I used to think that was the coolest thing in the world, that I just kind of stumbled upon that funeral home. And I was in the building where they're doing surveillance, because that was one of the stops on my route.
So it's interesting you say that. So I imagine the mobsters, when they get a real cop who might be doing something corrupt, they're really leery at killing him because there are consequences both ways. And it just reminds me of the movie I did, Prince of the City, where they got Treat Williams' character, and they think he's corrupted, and that he's given information. And anyways, they're going to kill him, and it was actually his mobster cousin who says, "Well, if you think he's dirty, go ahead, but if he's not, he has a lot of friends." I think that's how that scene went, and ultimately because his cousin had a relationship with him, he ends up dying. The mobster ends up killing him. So, but so I guess even if they think the cop is doing bad, they are still leery about killing a cop. In this situation, in the Lucio situation in Prince of the City, that I guess that's the flavor I'm coming away with, Vic. Would you agree with that?
Oh, killing a cop brings so much heat. I mean, you got to remember the NYPD has 40,000 members. There's task forces with every federal agency imaginable. I mean, look what happened with Eddie Burns, that poor rookie cop that got killed, guarding that witness's house in like 1988 or 1989. They decimated that organization, and then you had that mob associate, Gus Constable Farace, that killed Everett Hatcher, the DEA agent. I mean, they brought so much heat on the mafia. The mafia wound up killing this guy and leaving him in the street, like just take him. I mean, they shot him in front of a park and just left his body there for the police just to make it stop. So in the movie, no one had been killed to that point, right? None of the kidnapped guys had been killed. They'd been beat up and smacked around, and they got extorted for money, but no one died. So at that point, I think that's why they put the cop in the trunk of the car and sent him to the drop with the money. Like, all right, we know you're doing it. This stops now.
Stop it, yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because, Vic, even if maybe the cop's a little dirty, when you start killing a cop, people do take it personal. I worked a couple areas, or I think it was over at Linwood. I can't remember was it Blair, Cliff?
Stephen Blair. Yeah, I rode with him many times. Yeah.
And he's killed by a young crowd, I think.
Young crowd. Ham Park. Yep.
And I was there years later as a supervisor. They sent me there because they're having some challenges there. And those guys still made it very personal with young crowd. Everybody was expected to go visit young crowd before they went into the regular district and give them attention. And I think the same thing happened with Deputy Escalante. Remember, he was actually killed in LAPD's area. And I want to say it was the Avenues area.
It was, yeah, Juan Escalante, yeah.
Yeah, and I was the chief of transit police for a while, Vic, and so I covered all of LA City with my folks, and I get a visit, and they say, "Hey, can we use some of your special teams to make some forays into the Avenues area?" And technically it wasn't their beat, but hey, they killed the deputy, right? So of course I said, absolutely. They were looking at intelligence on a particular gang I think it was the Avenues gang was the name of it, that was responsible for it. So you're right. We do pay special attention to those criminal organizations that go out of their way to kill cops. That was your experience in New York with mafiosos, I imagine. But in LA, our organized crime is street gangs that slinging dope and controlling neighborhoods. And we pay special attention to them, even years later, right, Cliff?
Yeah, even years later. Yeah. So yeah, that was yeah, definitely.
So, and it's because I went to Century let's see, that was probably 5 or 6 years after Stephen's murder. They were still doing that. So you earn special attention from the police when you start killing policemen, right? So the next scene is open the trunk. And so this speaks to what you're talking about, Vic. They throw our good guy cop into the trunk of the car. That's going to be what, as far as they're concerned, the payoff to get their guy back. And it actually doesn't go very well. I don't know if I would have wanted to be the driver of the car, because he got a raw end of the deal. How do you get that? Who draws the short straw to drive the car to the garage? And I'm talking the mobster guy that drives the car. He's nervous. He knows what's going on. This isn't a good thing for him. And he ends up getting shot as well. But he tells the guy to open the trunk, and the guy gets nervous and drops the keys, and they realize there's something not right about this. And it was actually Bo Hickman's character, I believe, who shoots into the trunk and kills our police officer. So, Cliff, I don't know. Would you want to draw the short straw here? The guy with the glasses there driving this car?
No way. No way. Yeah. It was interesting in the whole garage scene where they get that car up into the garage and shut the door. It's funny how there's all these little Vic, right? All these little nooks and cranny garages that have kind of weird access points off the street. And they're kind of confusing, right? I mean,
Oh, we used to pull stolen cars out of garages, long-term parking like that all the time. You always find steals in there.
Well, I think the other thing that I noticed about this scene is they had to use a third party here, and this is the link that actually begins to break the case. I think his name is Delatorio is the character's name or something like that. And I'm looking for the actor's real name. He was in The Godfather, and I can't find.
Yeah, I saw him in a lot of things.
He had a pretty good
Sure, yeah.
spot and good character actor spots. And that's as soon as I saw him, I think that guy was in The Godfather, right? And he Biantangello, I can't remember the name of the character now, but he ends up getting a shootout when they try to kill his boss, and he ends up turning on the Corleones because he thinks the Corleones were responsible. But I reckon, and he plays a tough guy here where he doesn't give up the goods. But it does bring one third guy in here or another character in here, and that is the weak link that they eventually use to break the case. But in this particular scene, these guys are monitoring this because they're looking for the guy. They realize he didn't come out of the funeral. They realize he's been kidnapped. They figure out where the car went, and now they're trying to get in the garage, but too late. Their partner is killed, and the driver of the car, I think, he's seriously wounded because they end up having a conversation with him in the hospital. Vic, they talk about sub garages in New York or these kinds of garages in New York. You don't have open air garages because land is valuable, so they build up, right?
Yeah, you do have open air garages, but like in Manhattan, yeah, it's all underground, or like this scene was filmed in Brooklyn. So that's probably a warehouse that's been since converted into a warehouse. Now it's probably, like you guys were saying earlier, it's probably a Starbucks and condominiums above it. But yeah, there were places like that when I was active. And like I said, car thieves a lot of times would pay for parking because they didn't want their stolen car to get picked off the street before, they had a buyer for it, or it's getting shipped out of the country or whatever. So, these garages were common all over New York City, especially like Manhattan and the Bronx.
And being from Detroit, I can't help but notice these old Motor City classics they're in these garages and throughout the movies. I mean, I saw some older European cars in these movies too. But it just reminds me of growing up as a kid. I used to see these. I was Motor City. You did not see a foreign car until maybe the mid '70s. You started seeing some Japanese stuff coming in, but it was a big four at the time. We had it was a GM, and then Ford and Chrysler and American Motors, but American Motors Corporation. And my dad's buddies said he went to high school, all worked at these places. My grandfather worked assembly line for Chrysler. Both my grandfathers did. And but that's the other thing I noticed about this movie is these old American classic cars that with great lines and just stuff that you're used to growing. I mean, what was the first car that you had, Cliff?
I had a '67 Chevy Impala 283, and just loved that car, man. It was just amazing. Yeah, loved it.
What about you, Vic?
'73 Buick Regal.
Yes, right. And your first car, you always like it fondly, even if it is a ghetto cruiser, right? It's your first car.
What'd you have?
I had a ghetto cruiser. I had a Satellite Sebring, former police car, very fast, looked like crap. But my parents wouldn't let me buy a car until I was 18. I wanted to get something. I had my eye on this '68 Cougar, cherry red. It was beautiful. And this gal was selling it in high school, and I had the money. I'd been working since I was 14, and they wouldn't let me buy it. So yeah, After Dark says, hey, we got Chevy Impalas are like tanks. You could hit anything. Yeah, they were a little more sturdy. I think cars are made to crunch now to absorb the impact, so you could survive it as a passenger.
I found out what you couldn't hit: a deer. That's how I got taken out. A deer.
with the car you had?
Yep, with the Impala, 67 Chevy Impala. Hit a deer, boom, it was totaled.
Yeah. Well, you hit a full-size deer, and and people in LA probably don't understand that. I imagine people in Manhattan don't understand that either. But
Yeah.
growing up in Michigan, you start getting into the country, and you're going to run into wildlife. In fact, the last time I was there, we went up northern Michigan for my mom's 80th birthday, and my wife, she's listening. Hello, honey. She's just drives her crazy when she sees the roadkill, because it's like, oh my god,
yeah. I actually hit the deer I hit was actually a Hollywood deer.
It was a Hollywood deer.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I had a fake rack. I couldn't help myself.
They couldn't. All right. Well, that's the comedian, and folks. If you've never seen Cliff stand up, I don't know. Do you have some of your stand up on videos there, Cliff?
I think I do. Some old ones. Yeah. But oh my god.
Yeah. You have to.
I crack myself up sometimes.
So we have somebody said a 74 Chevy Nova, and you know what? Let's get into the car chase scene, because I think this is a big part of the movie. And yeah, let's Martine, can you bring up? Let's see. I guess it's the Pontiac that the bad guy was driving, and it's well, wait, let's get through the scene first, and then. But I have pictures of the cars that were used in this chase too. So the murders happen. He realizes the murders happen. He sees the guys take off, and now the chase scene is on. And of course, okay, Vic, I got to ask you, how realistic is it to do a chase scene like this that you saw in the movie in New York? I mean, I would think it'd be like a blood clot in New York most of the time, but
you can't do that now. But then they did. You couldn't pull something off like that, or the chase scene in the French Connection now. But back then they did. I just actually watched a documentary getting ready for this movie, this interview. I watched a documentary on it, and they did. It was like first thing on an early Sunday morning there wasn't as much traffic back then, and that was on the Lower West Side of Manhattan. And yeah, they did it. I mean, and they got away with it. Nowadays the NYPD created what's called the movie TV unit, which, if you can believe that, and they go to these movie sets and they make sure no one screws with the stars, but they also make sure things like this doesn't happen anymore. But yeah, this scene was done, and yeah, they were speeding. I mean, the scene with the kids almost getting hit by a car, that wasn't real, but yeah, the other scenes with them turning the corner on two wheels and, doing 80, 90 miles an hour on 10th Avenue. Yeah, they really did that.
Well, when you're saying they wouldn't let them do it anymore, so this is a Hollywood chase scene that they allowed. I was asking actually chasing somebody, if you're a cop actually chasing a real criminal, how, could this have happened, given the density and the number of people in New York? How far would it have gone?
So the dirty little secret in the NYPD when I was active is we don't chase stolen cars. Yeah. We did all the time, but that was the dirty little secret. We didn't, but we did. You were only allowed to chase for a violent felony. And what would happen is, if you were and I was in countless car chases because I worked in auto theft. You don't put it over the radio that you're in pursuit. You say you're following, and you try to keep your voice down. But the dispatcher figures out they can hear the siren, they can hear the screeching, they can tell by the distance you're traveling. All of a sudden you're on one block, and then you're 30 blocks away in 10 seconds. What'll happen is the patrol supervisor will come over the air, and he's going to say, "Patrol supervisor," he's trying to give you the heads up, like this is going to come to an end. And I don't agree with it, but guys would start stepping on the supervisor. Then you'll get the duty captain come over the air, and he's trying to call it off, and guys start stepping on him. But did car chases go on in my day like that? Yeah, sometimes. For the movie aspect, they could never do that again. I don't know what's going on in the NYPD, but yeah, I was in a lot of car chases, and sometimes they went very far distances at very high speed.
So, Vic, as you laid out your department's policy, I recognize where the changes in our policy came from. It used to be a little more wide open Wild West in LA, and then suddenly some of the same rules that you're talking about, we embraced on the LA County Sheriff's Department. I think LAPD to some degree. Remember that change, Cliff, where you were able to chase them, and then you had all these rules on chases.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I guess because we didn't have a deep pocket in upstate, we were just, 20 deputies department. The 5 years I was there, I don't even know if we had a lawsuit And so, our policy was you run, we chase. Yeah, and when the comparison of between LA and, we had guys, hey, can you pull the tractor trailer across the road? And they would just do that routinely. Just crazy stuff. And guys would be chasing people 100 miles an hour. Hey, this guy, I'm gonna have to take him out. He's gonna kill somebody. They would hit the left rear corner with their right front bumper, and they would wipe both. We were just a wild west when we were in upstate New York. There was no policy.
So I let a pursuit go for 2 hours. I was a lieutenant, right? And the way they do this is they write in the policy that you'll never be chastised for canceling a pursuit, which is a real invitation to cancel all pursuits, right? And this guy had committed a carjacking with a gun. Our guys got in a brief pursuit with him, and it was really foggy. And so the field sergeant canceled it, right? And the guy came back at them, challenging them to pursue him again, and that he wanted to die by police intervention. And so the pursuit was on again, and I let it go for 2 hours.
Wow.
The guy finally ran out of gas, and he surrendered, and he was the guy. And the way I thought about it is I can't just let this guy go, because he could run into some other just lone officer and challenge them in a gunfight. And we know who he is. We can see him. I'm not going to let him go. So I let it go. And this was a Tuesday night into a Wednesday morning. And so I wrote my pursuit memo. I sent it up. And then we had this thing on Wednesday mornings called the Executive Planning Council. It's all the division chiefs, which I retired as, the assistant sheriff, the undersheriff, and sometimes the sheriff. And they would talk about all the events that went on. And the very first thing they talk about was the pursuit I let go for 2 hours. And the question for the chief was why do you have a lieutenant letting a pursuit go for 2 hours? I was at Compton. Compton's a pretty dicey area, and I recognized a lot of these guys probably avoid having to make these decisions all these years. They're now evaluating my decision to let it go. Fortunately, so it's very similar to what you're talking about, Vic. They'd rather see the pursuit canceled, particularly for low-level crimes. And even for higher level crimes, because the liability to the department is really what it's all about, and paying out those lawsuits. And I decided to transfer shortly after that, because I knew I was going to be a little, I don't want to say looser on what I was going to let go, but I was going to, if it was within policy, I wasn't going to cancel. That's just me. I wasn't going to cancel it if it was within policy. If it was out, I canceled my fair share that were out of policy. Like you said, we wouldn't necessarily let them know we're in pursuit. We're just following. I would catch onto that scam right away and cancel them. So, with all due respect, Vic, it didn't. But if they were in policy and they were clearly chasing somebody that should be chased, I let it go. And that's a hazard for a supervisor. I don't know if you want to comment on that story, Vic, but that was my experience.
Yeah, I see both sides of it. As far as you can't let, if the cops just refuse to stop chasing people, then you have anarchy. But on the other side of the coin, God forbid someone gets hurt, and the civil liability aspect of it. With us, if you got involved in, again, I don't know what goes on now, but back then, if you got involved with a car chase for a stolen car and they called it off and you kept chasing, if you caught the guy and nobody got hurt, nothing got crashed, no harm, no foul, no one's going to come looking for you. But God forbid, a civilian gets hurt, a cop gets really hurt, a police car gets crashed, then they're going to hurt you. So it was one of those things where you really had to weigh it, before you proceeded. And, you're a cop, you were trained to go after the bad guys, and you kind of get locked into that tunnel vision like that son of a bitch. And then you got to pull yourself back and go, wait a minute, this isn't worth it.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. I'm in East Compton, and I had a trainee, and we had 3 male Hispanics stopped, and we had them out of the car, and we put them in our car, and we were searching their car. And my trainee said, it's on Atlantic Avenue, and she says, "There's the stolen car they just broadcast going by." And so, come on, we jumped in our car, we turn around, and we put the lights on. The chase is on, and we start going through these side streets, and they jumped out, and the car goes into a tree, and then they're running. And so we put out a containment, right? So we're putting units where everything, and we're calling for a K9 and everything. So we're there. I got a command post. I'm on the hood with a dry erase board, and K9 comes, and And the watch commander comes down, the lieutenant comes down. He's loving. He goes, "Oh, this is great. You got everything together." He goes, "But who are those three guys in your back seat?" And I go, "Oh shit. Those were the guys that we had in our back seat. We were searching the car. I forgot all about them. They ran on the chase with us." Thank God the lieutenant didn't make a big deal out of it, because he certainly could have. So somebody took them back to their car pronto, and it was just funny.
Gap After Dark had made some comments. So in the chase scene, if you remember, we just talked through the chase scene, but let's bring up the Pontiac Grand Villa. So this is the bad guy's car, and it's a bigger car. I don't, Martine, do you have a picture of the Pontiac Grand Villa? There it is. See, there's the picture of it, and big. It looks like it's a coupe there, right? But big car. Big engines in these cars, probably a V8 with whatever the 4-barrel and
tank.
It's just a tank. Yeah,
I loved those. I loved those cars. Oh my God.
Yeah, and this is the bad guys are driving this car, and then let's bring up the Ventura that our cop was. Now, when I first saw this car, I in the movie I thought it was a Nova.
Me too.
And it is
similar
to Nova, but it's the Ventura, and it's supposed to be, believe it or not, Cliff, it's named after the city of Ventura. So I guess they were trying to bring
I didn't know that.
a little bit of California light to the auto industry in Detroit. But it's built, I believe, on the same chassis. And Detroit does that. They'll build different cars on the same chassis.
Yeah.
And sells them across their brands. But this was supposed to be just a small muscle car. And one of our guys who's a aficionado, one of the guys listening Gap After Dark, said, "Hey, this is an automatic, but you can hear him downshifting and upshifting like it was a stick in the chase scene." And but that it's these old cars that are, like, I remember the fastest car we ever had, Cliff, and you probably drove them. We had the Chevy with the Corvette engines. And remember those years where we had those cars?
They're the LT engines or Corvette engines. Yeah.
Yeah, they could get up and go.
Yeah.
And and we loved them so much, we just kept rebuilding the engines as long as we could to keep as many of them on the road as possible. And they were great cars. But I just seeing this car reminded me when I first joined, we had a few undercover Novas still around. And I remember we had we had a carjacking on the Sunset Strip. And I was working a uniform detail in an unmarked car. So one of these type of things. And sure enough, they came down the Sunset Strip to San Vicente. I want to say it was at the Rainbow where they did this carjacking. One guy had a sawed-off shotgun. The other guy had a 44, which is what came out. And I had a brand new guy, Joe Morales, working with me, right?
Joe. Yeah.
And uniforms lost it. It was a Porsche. And I picked him up in this Nova, and I started following. They didn't realize, when they realized who I was, they tried to negotiate a turn near Beverly and crashed. So we were in Beverly Hills by this time, and they both went in different directions. And I went after the one with the shotgun, and I'm chasing him, And I told Joe, put it out. His first day, put it out, and chasing this guy on foot. And he turns a corner, this brick building. I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I'm going to turn that corner real fast. He's got a shotgun. We ended up not catching him till hours later in the containment. But yeah, I love this. The Nova. I like driving the Nova that because it had some get up and go when I was driving the field, and that's what. And I like these cars. You can take that picture down, Martine. But I felt that the chase scene was the classic part of the movie. It was consistent with what you saw on the French Connection, although he wasn't really chasing a car in French Connection. He's chasing a train. He's going under an elevated train platform, as I remember.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
But that was a big part of the movie. And when you're driving a high speeds like that, your reaction times, it's important to have good reaction times. You really need to know what you're doing. And I can understand why our agencies put the kibosh on some of these guys, because sometimes guys drive in over their head and they don't know when to back off, right? And but this is probably for me the most exciting part of the movie. Although I had a conversation pre-show with Martine. He says, they do car chases to kind of because they got nothing else to talk about, right? I said, it just kind of adds reality. But this director also did Bullet. Now, do you guys remember that Steve McQueen's chase scene where he's driving the fastback Mustang?
68 Mustang, yeah. Yeah, it was awesome.
I had a 66 hardtop, a coupe out here for a while in California. I sold it because I didn't have the mechanical skills to keep it up myself. But so I just loved all three of these chase scenes. Vic, you want to weigh in on these chase scenes? Classic movie making.
Yeah, I mean, and the Seven Ups, the French Connection, like you said, Bullet, and then Friedkin did "To Live and Die in L.A.," which has got another classic car chase scene. I don't think those movies could ever. I don't know. Nowadays everything is CGI and everything else. I don't think that they could get away with doing that anymore.
Well, yeah. I agree with you. But Cliff, what do you think of all three of these? Well, you've seen the movie Bullet. I haven't reviewed it yet, but
Yeah, and I wanted to ask Vic because I was down by the seaport, and I saw the overhead. I go, this must have been was that with the French Connection? Was that
Yes.
chase scene there by the seaport? Okay, because it looks just like it. And I go, I bet it was filmed right
Also
here.
down there, if you remember where they parked the car that's supposed to have the heroin in it,
Yeah,
and you see
yeah.
the kids outside. First they're playing hockey with a beer can, and then you get the Spanish guys that are going to go strip it, and they pull it off the street. You're 100% right. That's the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Oh, I love that area. Yeah, I recognized it when I was down there.
We used to park underneath there and go to court back in the day. Yeah, we used to park on and go. Yeah, that's the lower level of the FDR Drive.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I recognize some others. We had some friends from LA that went out with us. They actually got married there in Manhattan at the marriage bureau. So there's a scene right where there's City Hall, and you can see the marriage bureau is off to the side there. That whole area is kind of an interesting area where City Hall is. It's pretty amazing sight, the City Hall with the pillars and.
Oh yeah, and that's also the scene where you talk about the old courthouse in The Godfather, where
yes.
Where the cop, where the guy dressed as the cop shoots the guy in the back as he falls down the stairs.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh yeah, I love that area. It's great.
Okay, let's get some so I asked everybody what car they had, and Martine, the show manager, he chimes in. He had a 72 AMC Javelin. So I remember that. I grew up in Detroit, so I remember all of these cars. And After Dark, see a 74 Chevy Nova. Again, another great car. And After Dark, he's actually a 7-Up's aficionado. He loves the show, and he talks about Richard Lynch. Now, Richard Lynch, I guess we should talk about him. He's the main. He's the main bad guy. He's this pale skinned actor, right? And he plays Moon, and he plays. He's of the two bad guys, bad guys. He's
been in so many movies. That guy,
and he always seems to play a bad guy.
Bad guy,
movies,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
Character actor. Yeah.
Then I had an actor on. He was a character actor, Kevin Major Lloyd, on last week, and we talked about that. He says, "Hey, if you get a part, don't worry about being a character actor. If you're working and it's putting money on the table, that's what it's all about." Here we got another buddy. I had a 68 Dart Sport Coupe. Yes, I remember that. I had, we drove Dodge Darts.
My grandmother had a Dodge Dart. We had a 68 Dodge Charger, which was crazy fast. I loved it. Man, hello, Penny.
Hey, Penny. Yeah, well, I had we drove Dodge Darts because my grandpa would hand me down his car, our cars. I had one sister a year older, a twin sister, a sister a year younger. We were all in high school, and we had to share a car, right? And so we got the grandpa's hand-me-down Dodge Dart, which was really cool because we had the engine rebuilt, and after the engine was built, it was even faster than before it was done. So it was a fun car, and it was a car that was hard to destroy. We needed that because we were all teenagers. So anyway, so it's this was a great chase scene. I would recommend at least find the clip of the chase scene and watch it, because you would, if you're a aficionado of movies, hyper masculine scenes, this is it. These are the kind of masculine scenes that guys like to watch. This escapism type movies that all guys like to go to. Dads like to take their sons to. I forget who I was interviewing, and he says, "No, my dad took me to this movie, and it was one of those bonding movies that I had with my dad, and it was just these." None of this romantic comedy crap. It's good masculine movie. You know what I mean? And that's what draws guys in. I think some of the movie making is forgetting that some of the biggest buyers of these tickets are men. They like that escapism, to be able to just get away from the world by themselves for the most part, because you lose yourself in a movie. What do you think? We got to get back to the movie making where we're making a little more masculine movies like we see in this one, right, Cliff?
Well, to an extent, but some are just, too fast and furious, blowing up. Everything is a blow up scene every 5 seconds. I don't like that.
Yeah, that's why I like these old style movies, because they
Yeah.
they add the
There's
drama.
a realism to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I
They-
mean, not everybody's carrying an M16 or machine gun, and like you
Yeah.
said, the fireworks and the explosives every 30 seconds. There's no story.
No story.
It's
Yeah.
more. Cliff's right. It's more on the special effects, and I mean, and I'm sure speak for Cliff. I mean, growing up in the '70s, watching these movies, that's why I wanted to become a cop.
Me too. Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I knew what I wanted to do by 7 years old. You know, it's like my parents were like, "Don't you want to go to college? Don't you want to?" Nope. I knew what I wanted to do.
Well, it's I think some of the latest movies, particularly when they do a lot of the woke stuff, I'm really not interested in watching that. I'd rather watch an old
No.
movie that's a little more realistic. And I like these. I think it was a war movie that my friend was talking about, where his dad took to, Midway or Tora Tora, one of those things where,
Oh.
it's based upon a real life story. And I just, when I do some of these old movies in particular, like the French Connection. So some of those guys, I don't know if they would have served in World War II or not, but these are a lot of these old movies. Because if you think back, like Cary Grant, no, not Cary Grant, but Jimmy Stewart, he was the guy that played in Gone with the Wind. I can't remember. Clark Gable. A lot of these guys, Lee Marvin, all of them served in World War II. Charlie Bronson, they all served in World War II. And these were, masculine men who risked their life for their country, and now they're portraying tough guys on movies, and they were very realistic, and you could get into the characters. I kind of see that with these guys. There's I'm sure some of these guys served.
Oh yeah, Hackman was in the Marines. And
Hackman,
Roy Scheider was a boxer. He almost went pro. If you look at close-ups of Roy Scheider, look at his nose.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that thing's been broken more times. So I mean, yeah, these guys were rough knockaround guys. It was believable. They didn't have perfect teeth. You know what I mean? They weren't soy boys. I mean, they just got to be a guy that lived next door to you.
It was as I read about some of these actors, particularly some of the ones that played these masculine roles. They served, and then they got out and they went on the GI Bill, and they went to schools to learn how to act, and then they became actors, which is, I wouldn't have thought that, but hey, everybody was serving back because it was all hands on deck, during World War II, and then some of these guys fought in Korea, and the Forgotten War, and so that's why I kind of like it. I don't want to be preached to at a movie. I just want to be entertained.
Yeah.
And I think
Escapism. Yeah.
in
Like you
terms of
said.
movies, that we're kind of, I know there's big drama with Disney right now. They keep making movies nobody wants to see. But we want to see stuff that's related to real life. We want to things that are about our experience, and we also, for guys, for the most part, we just want to escape for a few hours from.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's what movie making is all about, Cliff. One of the things about movies is, during the Great Depression, was one of the explosion of movies is because people just wanted an escape.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. And for 2 hours, you could be taken somewhere else in another time or place. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's get, I think the thing about Roy Schneider is beginning to realize that he's getting played by his friend. He's starting to put it together. He's noticing, now he carries a little book around with him with all of his targets, all the guys that he's targeting. And he's noticing that the people who are getting kidnapped, because they essentially, as you said earlier, Vic, different sides of the department aren't necessarily communicating. And as his partner is killed, that communication is starting to open up. And one of the things that gets communicated is they've been hearing rumors about mobsters getting kidnapped. And Sonny doesn't know that. Roy Schneider's character doesn't know that. And so that's news to him. Now, he understood that there was a lot of guns in the neighborhood, as he found that out from the barber, that there was something going on, but he didn't know what it was. And he's getting intelligence from the other ends of the department. And he started, okay, wait a minute. So who's been kidnapped? He gets a list of those names. And he realizes that his little book that he's carrying around, his little notebook of pictures and who's who in the crime world in the area that he's responsible for New York, it's very consistent with the people. In fact, it's exactly the same people are being kidnapped, and he's starting to put it together that maybe his good friend is using the information. Hey, do you know anything about this guy? How about this guy? And that's keying his friend. Hey, maybe we can. I'll just use the list. The names he's thinking his friend Vito is an informant, and in reality, he ends up being an informant for Vito to do these dastardly deeds, these kidnappings. I don't think I've ever heard that before, where it's I certainly can understand if there's guys that are corrupted, that would happen, but it indicates that Sonny's way too loose with his information with his friend Vito, right, Vic?
Yeah, and it comes back to bite him in the ass, because there's that scene in the hospital where his supervisor pulls him aside, that the lieutenant that really didn't want that unit to exist in the first time, and then the inspector or the captain who's over him. Now he's starting to, put heat on him, like, we're going to disband the unit. In the real world, if there was even any type of suspicion of that, the NYPD, they put you on what's called modified assignment, which you take your gun, your ID card, your shield, they stamp your ID card that you're on modified. And then what they'll do is they'll transfer you to one of many places in the NYPD, which is like Siberia. And they're not going to make you comfortable. So if you live in the Bronx, they'll send you out to the Staten Island court system, or you'll be at the Whitestone Pound, where you'll be guarding cars with this army of feral cats that live out there. And they're going to start bringing you in. You're going to go to internal affairs. You'll have representation. And, if you lie and they figure out that you're lying or being deceptive or omitting, you're out of a job.
Yeah.
So they take that, like in the movie, they basically tell them, well, we're just going to shut it down, and, you're going to be fine until we get to the bottom of this. In the real world, no, they would if they even suspected something like that, they would put the screws to you very quickly.
Well, because they would assume you were actually involved, right?
Absolutely.
That would be the first thing, right? And, and I wanted to back up a little bit. You said something earlier in the show that administrators are leery of doing new things. And I can tell you from my experience, although I ended up being a senior administrator, actually one of the roadmaps for me being successful is I was willing to take risks and do different things, and it became successful. But most people wouldn't do that. I remember proposing ideas to people, and they're like, because it's like, well, we've done it this way for 50 years. Let's keep doing, we haven't quite solved the problem. Maybe we need to try something a little different and use a different strategy. And then when you use that strategy and you're successful, then it's like, oh, well, and the great thing I learned about it is if you're successful, success has many fathers. Failure is an orphan, right? But that risk taking isn't necessarily something you're going to find in large bureaucrat. And I came from the largest sheriff's department in the country. So you had the largest police agency. Ours was the largest sheriff's, like 18,000 employees. So that is a reality. Making organizational change or trying something new is a challenge in a big organization because it's not the safe thing to do.
No, and unfortunately, civil service doesn't promote creativity. It doesn't. And like you said, they will do the same thing even though it's not working. And then oftentimes with the NYPD, then all of a sudden something will give them a kick in the ass. And then as opposed to putting their pinky toe in and trying something out, they cannonball in with something ridiculous. And then that backfires. And then it's a ripple effect that makes it worse. And then they're even more reluctant to try something out because look what we did. As stupid as it sounds, like the Wright brothers' first plane, it didn't go up. So let's just shut everything down.
Yeah, and the safe course is to not do anything different. And I can tell you when you're challenging a manager, hey, let's do it this way, they're going to want to do the safe way. That impacts their career safely for them, even though it might not be the right thing to do for the organization or the people you serve. Cliff, you've worked for those kind of, let's just do the same thing we did yesterday kind of administrators. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, the stakes get higher and higher as you go up in rank, right? And there's a lot more overview and what do you call it? Critique of what you're trying to put together. Although I think there was kind of they were trying to foster an environment of creativity, right? I remember when I wasn't promoted, someone said to my wife, "Well, has he come up with the program yet? Has he created a program?" That was their big thing, right? Does he have a program?
Yeah, and I when you guy creates a program, and I always looked at programs. Okay, is it effective? Is it sustainable over time? And can somebody step in and do it after I leave, right? Because I always
Right.
looked at it from an organizational standpoint of sustainability standpoint, whereas other people are looking at it as I just need to get my apple polished and get promoted. I don't care if it falls apart after I leave, right?
Yeah.
Well, you were I just did a little program up at Universal City where I was doing truancy enforcement, and I got nothing but
Yeah.
resistance, nothing but resistance. It's unconstitutional. You can't do it. And Universal City is a kind of a closed off area for entertainment, high entertainment. And we were having gangsters and kids showing up creating havoc. And so I started doing truancy sweep at 10 o'clock at night, and I
I didn't know you
chased them all out
started
of it.
that. That became a
I
big
started
thing.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
and I got
No one
told
gave
you
you
can't
credit
do
for
it.
that.
It's unconstitutional. And I said, well, get out of my way, wash me. And so we
Yeah.
did it. It worked great. And I left. And 6 years later, I came back. They were still doing it. I was lieutenant
Yeah.
now. So yeah, I took a risk. It worked. And of course, I found out other people took credit for it.
Yeah. I was going to say, I didn't know you
Which
started that.
what,
Wow.
Universal was, City Walk were very happy because it netted. Because what I did is I FI'd everybody that was getting in trouble, and I looked at the age ranges of the people involved, and most of them were underage, and then some of the adults that were with them are just hanging with the same group. So if you got rid of all the underage kids who are loitering without purpose, it pretty much is going to solve 90% of your problems, and that's exactly what happened. But I took a risk, it worked, and you know what? Then it became incorporated, and of course, a lot of people took credit for it.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, I was the one who started that, Cliff. It was interesting.
Yeah.
But hey, in the movie, our guy is figuring out. They actually go to the guy who, one of the guys who was kidnapped. They break into his house, if you remember this scene, to get information on these kidnappings, and they get that information, and now their goal is to get the killers, right? And so they get information on these guys. They follow the third guy involved here that was in the garage, Vittorio, I think is his name, and they're in his house. And these other two guys are showing up at his house, and this is where they actually have a shootout with the killers. And so these are the guys that lost him in the pursuit. And one of the things about the pursuit is at the end of that pursuit, Roy Schneider's car slams under a truck, right? A trailer tractor, and it takes the hood off. And they said that was a throwback to how Jane Mansfield died, the beautiful Jane Mansfield. I don't know if you know that, but she was decapitated in an accident very similar to that. And I go, why would you do something so morbid as that?
Yeah.
But these guys, so here they get in the shooting, and Bo's character is taken out fairly quickly by one of our detectives. So here's our detectives are shooting it out. He's got a shotgun, which was always my preferred weapon of choice if I was going into a hot situation. I'd rather have the shotgun. I was a decent shot, but I'd much rather have a shotgun than just doing a handgun here. And here's our
this is filmed all around my old neighborhood.
Is it? Talk about it then.
Outside of Co-op City.
Is this a suburban part, or is it still in LA
that
proper?
Street where they filmed that scene doesn't really exist anymore because they kept building Co-op City up. I grew up in Throgs Neck, which is right on the other side. It's like when we were watching the movie, I'm like, oh shit, that's like right off I-95. Yeah, see the big building in the background? That's Co-op City, which is like one of the largest housing developments in the country at the time. And then in the scene where Roy Scheider kills Richard Lynch, a lot of that stuff, those old coolers and stuff, there was an abandoned amusement park there called Freedom Land that opened up in the 60s. It was only open for a couple of years, and then it went out of business. And a lot of that stuff where you see them messing around with, that's part of the old abandoned amusement park that was a dumping area. They kind of knocked down the amusement park to build those buildings for Co-op City.
Well, I saw those ice things, and I go, why the hell do they have all these ice things there?
I was there for years.
Was it just to supply ice for the amusement park? Was that what that was
I
all
guess
about?
so. Or, I mean, there's just a lot of things there that just was like the garbage from the amusement park. They don't really show the whole thing of it, but.
Well, they do end up killing Richard Lynch here. They're chasing him down, the bad guy. Bill Hickman gets killed a little earlier, and one of the police officers is wounded in the shooting. But and here's the other part of this. I don't know what you guys carried, but I don't think I'd have been carrying this little 5-shot thing. If I knew I'm going to get in a shooting, I'm going to have something a little heavier than that, and I'm probably going to have a couple different guns. If I think I'm going to shoot it out with somebody that's already killed a cop. I don't know. What are your thought on it, Vic? You're gonna be a little more prepared.
We started out when I started out in '87. We had the 6-shot 38, and you would carry what Roy Scheider has, like that little 5-shot Chief, and probably about 94, 95 is when we went to the 9mm.
Yeah, but if you're going to this, you're not just going to have your 5-shot Chief. You're going to have
Oh,
you're going to be a
no.
little more substantial stuff, right? That's I think
Yeah.
that was my criticism. That it wasn't real life. If I'm going with some shooters, I'm probably going to have a couple guns on me. I think when I was a detective, I carried the 2.5-inch Smith & Wesson 357. I liked that gun. It was a nice,
Yeah, I
good,
did too.
steady gun. And in patrol we carried the 38s, and then we switched to the 9. But I was okay. Being the cop in me, I was a little frustrated. Okay, I'm not going to be taking a Chief into a gunfight, right? That's I carried one as a backup, with the shroud, the
Yeah, I
kind
did
of the
too.
Chief gun with the
Shrouded
shroud,
hammer.
so
Yeah.
you can put it in a pocket holster and rip it out if you need to. But the bad guys get in the end, which is good. But they realize they still got one more guy to go, and let's just roll right into that scene. And he confronts so they got the killers. The next scene is he confronts his friend, right? And
Yeah.
and this is what he's put it all together. Sonny, he's put it all together, and he's now telling him the bad news. I'm not going to take you down, man. I'm just going to leave you to your friends.
Yeah.
And it's going to leak out. And I don't know. I think I would have liked the collar on this one, Vic. I would have liked to take him to jail, although it would have been a little embarrassing that he was getting the information from me. I think I'd have liked to see him in prison, because he'd have gotten it in prison too from the Mafia as well, because they have reach that can go into the prisons. What'd you think of this scene, Vic?
Yeah, I think more than likely, had he arrested him, he would have gotten killed in the can. But I think what the beauty of this scene is, it kind of leaves it up for the interpretation of what's going to happen to him. Is he really going to tell the mob? Is he going to let him go?
Yeah,
is he going to arrest him later? As a kid, I remember just watching that scene. I was kind of traumatized because I'd never seen a grown man fall to pieces before like that. So as a kid, I'm watching it, and there's this grown man throwing his head, pounding the railing and throwing his head. And I asked my father, I go, what's going to happen to him? He goes, it's not going to be good. So it just kind of, I think the way they ended it was good, because nowadays in movies, you almost can see what's coming. With this, they leave it up for use your own imagination of what's going to happen to this guy.
Yeah, and that might also set up a sequel. You never know. But yeah, I like the scene, because you know what, you're going to get the street justice, the criminal world justice. That's what you're going to get. That's what you're destined for. And it's interesting. He's crying that he did it for whatever, his wife and the kids and private schools and all that other stuff. But hey, I think that we saw 3 scores of 100,000, or maybe it was 2. Back then, that's a heck of a lot of money. So I mean, 1 score should have been able to set up the private colleges. So I always think when it's criminals involved, Vic, you can respond to this, and then we'll get your response, Cliff. It's the game too that's part of this, right? Did you notice when you're dealing with criminals, it's partly the game. It isn't just a living; it's the game.
I don't think they think it's ever going to end. I think they think that the money's going to keep rolling in. It's going to be good times all the time. And then, like you said, it's the money, and then it's the excitement, the game, and maybe after a score or two, just stop. And the guys that are disciplined enough to do that and move on to something else or retire, you never hear about them, which is far and few between. But like you said, most of them just get addicted to the action. Like we were addicted to the action and being in law enforcement. And, it often doesn't end well for them.
So, Cliff, same comment to you, but I want to remind you of a show we did where I talked about the stopwatch bandits. Same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Big scores, can't stop, keep going until they're either dead or in prison, right? Same kind of thing.
Those guys went on for years and pulling all those jobs. Yeah, they can't stop. And it's funny that and Vic was saying how it's a game, right? I'm reminded, how in the jails, all of a sudden a row would decide, no more searches. We're not going to comply. And, but they knew how it was going to go, even though the watch commander, hey, listen, we'll give you ice cream, anything, just, and no, we're not,
Yeah.
we're going to have to come in and there's going to be an ass whooping. Yeah, we know that. And then, but that's the way they want, that's our street cred. This happens, you're going to whoop us. And then, things are going to go back to the way they were. But it was kind of like, you're going to do your job and we're going to do ours. And their job was sometimes to not comply and get into it with you. But it was this game, right? It was like, and it's almost like, and I didn't like this. It was like at court, right? Where these attorneys would just love to on the stand, just, humiliate you. And then when they got out in the hallway, hey, hi, Cliff, how you doing? Like, oh, this is a game to you. To
Right.
me, you just humiliated me. I take it personal.
So I did most of my cases out of Beverly Hills Court, and so you always had a lot of very wealthy attorneys, or attorneys that made money, and they had good clients. But the judges would give those guys PD cases just to keep the money flowing in, and they would make donations to the judges. It was nothing corrupt. It's just a little bit of way of taking care of the guy who makes a donation. So if you were putting cases together as a street guy or as a detective, you better be ready, because you're going to be grilled by some top-notch.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that defended was the Menendez brothers. I went against them. Just high-priced attorneys. But I used to sit in court and watch how these attorneys, because they have patterns, is what I figured out. They had patterns, right? And this one attorney, what he would do is you'd go and you'd testify. Oh yeah, I did plain feel. I felt the vial of what I recognized as commonly used to transport illegal narcotics, methamphetamine or cocaine. So I pulled it out of his pocket and arrested him for said cocaine, right? And so this guy, what he did is he kept his heart medicine in his pocket, this attorney, right? So every time some deputy or officer got up there to testify about the plain feel and, recognized commonly used to transport illegal, he would go, you mean like this vial that I carry my heart medicine in? And so I knew that was a scam. And so I'm on the stand. And of course I do the same thing. He goes, and I said, commonly used to transport, illegal narcotics, methamphetamine or cocaine, except for one person. I know that you carry your heart medicine in the same kind of vial in your pocket. And I completely threw this public
timing.
Yeah, you mean this? I go, yeah, I remember that. I know that you're probably the only person I know that carries legitimate medicine in one of those vials. Everybody else, it's cocaine or methamphetamine. And it completely threw him off his stride. But yeah, so you got to be ready on the stand. And he leaves it as Vito is left. Hey, you got to help me. You got to help me. He says, hey man, you're on your own. So, hey, listen, we're at the end of our show.
What?
No. This was a great show. We had a good conversation.
What?
So, Vic, this is your first time. We kind of broke your cherry here. Did you like the show?
I loved it. I loved it the last time Cliff did it, and
Vic was on before.
Here, and it was a lot of fun talking to two fellow cops and just talking about cop movies and war stories. I enjoyed it.
Okay, good. Well, we'll have to have you back. Remember to stick around for a quick debrief. We always debrief after our operations. Cliff, good show, and I'm glad you come back, and I'm glad you're agreeing to do the next two shows for me.
I found it gives me a purpose in watching these movies. I'm not passively watching, right? I'm doing some homework here, and so I love it. Yeah.
Well, even though I got the new gig and it's right up more my alley, analyzing news, politics, and public policy, and it'll be a much more serious show. My first show will be on police suicides, December 6th. It'll be on KGRA radio and on Rumble. I think it'll be 5:00 Eastern Standard Time on Wednesdays. I'm looking forward to it because we had 4 police suicides recently on my department, and I get a chance to talk about more serious subjects. I love the movies. I love talking about them, but I really want to get into that too. But I'm going to do both for a while, and I might have to lean on Cliff here to help me out as I get a little busy with both shows. So thank you for coming on. Stick around for the debrief, and Martine, you can take it away.